We are live.
We're live. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming on
Hi.
today. I really appreciate you coming on live. This is cool.
People are starting to roll in. I love it.
Yeah. So hopefully, maybe type something into the chat box to make sure that you can hear us okay.
How do
See
you
if the
do
chat box
that?
is
You guys, this is my first webinar too. So, I've done a million podcasts, yet no webinars. How is that even possible?
there. Let me just
Are
pull sound on this.
you checking something?
Yeah.
Well, in the meantime, while he's checking on that, Tawny Prazak here. I am the host of the Endurance Planet podcast, and I am super stoked to be joining Chris today. Chris and I actually became friends earlier this year, and before I go on to like why I'm kind of involved in this whole webinar today, I want Chris to describe and let you guys know a little bit about his background and what his whole deal is, and then I'll let you know how he and I kind of synced up and how that has made such a huge difference in my life. I can't even describe to you guys. I mean, meeting Chris and teaming up with him and Dr. Jamie Bush this year has just been an incredible experience. You right there, Chris?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, my headphones aren't working, but that's okay.
All right, cool. So yeah, you want to go ahead and talk a little bit about Nourish, Balance, Thrive?
Sure. I should explain who I am and how I got started in all this. The first thing I should say is I'm not a doctor. I'm a computer scientist. Until March of this year, I was working as a computer scientist at a quantitative hedge fund in Walnut Creek. But I'm also a mountain biker. I race at the highest level. I'm not a real pro. So Dr. Jamie Bush, who I work with, she's a real pro. Like, she's collecting a salary. It's what she does for a living. That's not me. I'm a hobby pro, if you like. But some of the information I'm going to give you here tonight allowed me to get to that next level and to make an upgrade to pro. So it's kind of cool. And before I got to that point, I really, really fell apart. So I figured out I had a ton of food sensitivities. I'm actually celiac, so very, very sensitive to gluten.
Oh, you didn't tell me that. I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. So I
Wow.
figured this out along the way. I really was a mess at one point, and the
Join the
main
club,
people.
right?
Sorry,
Join the club, right?
you're right. Yeah. So if I had to sort of list off some symptoms, it would be fatigue was the number one thing. So I still managed to drag myself out there and do the training every day. I had a plan and I went out and I did the training, but you know, I really wasn't performing outside of that training. I was just couch bound the whole time, so tired, and really having trouble getting out of the bed in the morning. And my sex drive had completely disappeared. Like, I was not interested in women at all. It was like really not right.
Yet somehow you had a baby mixed in there that
Yeah,
came in
so
as
the baby came
well.
later, right? So I'm not sure it's a coincidence that the baby came after I did all this stuff,
Oh, there you go.
So I'm hoping that this is not all doom and gloom, and I'm sure many of you all know that endurance exercise is not the best thing you can do for your health and your energy levels outside of the training. But I think if you get it right, like if you balance things and you do the testing and you see where you're at and you don't let yourself get to the point where you've done too much breaking down and you're starting to fall apart and show symptoms, so things like fatigue and digestive symptoms and loss of libido and all that kind of stuff, then you can keep doing what you're doing and perform at the very highest level.
Right. So let me chime in a little bit and tell you guys a little bit about my connection here. And I've been a triathlete consistently racing since 2007. Once I did my first race, it was this Long Beach Triathlon in July 2007. I'll never forget the day. And I've been racing pretty hardcore ever since. And then it was, last year very, very significantly started just feeling a shift in my body, my performance, my ability to train, my mental state, like all this kind of stuff. Just something was off. Like just something was not me. And it might have even started a little bit before that, but last year I really, really felt it. And I was like, what is going on? Like something is just not normal. Like I can just feel it. Like I'm not me. Like I was still able to do everything I needed to do. I was able to work and be the coach I wanted to be and do the podcast and all that kind of stuff. But like my training was what was really suffering. And then the rest of my life, I was just like trash tired all the time. Like I was giving every ounce of energy I could into like the things I had to do, and then I was just dying. And then I was seeing my performance just slowly start to slip away from me. And at the same time, too, noticing some digestion health-related things, although I will say I didn't even really personally realize how bad my gut health had gotten until after sort of having this intervention with Chris and actually getting some concrete results of what my issues were and then solving them and then realizing, holy crap, like, well, I've been actually suffering for way longer than I even realized with digestion issues, gas, bloating, all those things. And now coming out the other end of that, like, and feeling otherwise is pretty incredible. And, you know, I will say, like, so this year has been a huge journey for me in not only spending the time to get these tests, because, you know, you can't just all of a sudden be like, I want to get, you know, these tests and everything is solved within a week. Like, it's a long process. Like, not only just like gathering the tests, doing the tests, then sending them back in, and then waiting for results, and then figuring out the protocol, and then implementing. I mean, it's a long process when all is said and done. And I would say, like, I'm definitely coming out on the positive side of things. Like, I'm seeing the changes. I don't think I'm completely, you know, 100% yet. I have yet to really get back to any consistent training. But I'll tell you, like, as I progress and learn more about all this and you know, kind of start to toy with some things again. Like, I've never been so acutely aware of every little piece of me and my body, how foods react in me, how certain exercises and workouts react, and I feel like I'm starting to become a whole person again, but like at another level of awareness with myself. But let me say, it's definitely been a tough journey, because I think that, you know, Chris, what you were sort of alluding to too is like the idea is being an athlete for so long and so dedicated, and it doesn't mean you have to be a pro. You know, neither of us are pros, but we care so much, you know, arguably just as much as professionals, and we want to perform at our best. We're competitive people, and to have that kind of like slowly slip away from you is really tough. And then for me to kind of like hang up the racing shoes and whatnot and just like kind of have to let it go, like, that's a hard thing to do. And then on the flip side, you know, getting healthy again and feeling how awesome you can feel, like slowly integrating that stuff back into your life in a healthful way, like that's another process in itself. So that's maybe like for the next webinar. Right now we just want to talk to you guys how you can, you know, even if you don't even necessarily feel like you're completely tanked like maybe Chris and I were, you know, for example, like I really honestly didn't realize how I had kind of let my gut health kind of just spin off into a bad place until I started repairing it. And that's even coming from someone who's eaten a relatively clean diet for years now. So kind of rambling, pretty standard. But I think what we wanted to really talk to you guys about today too is how you can take the steps in your life to get some of these tests done, and the things that Chris and Jamie and the team are doing at Nourish, Balance, Thrive. I mean, it's just amazing, because you can't really find this in general like Western medicine practices around here. Functional medicine doctors are doing it, but even that gets tough because the availability is hard, and that's where Nourish, Balance, Thrive is really cool, because you know, they're doing it all remotely, so you don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to leave the comfort of your home.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting what you said there about the symptoms. That really shocked me, and it was a fairly emotional moment, actually. The first time I experienced a normal level of bloating, like, it was honestly quite you know, I've been walking around with, I'm super lean, but still had this kind of bowling ball where my stomach should be, and it's just gas. It's just like an overgrowth of bacteria that sits there all the time, and every time you eat, you feed it, and you feel bloated after you eat, and it's been going on for about 35 years, so you've no idea like what's normal anymore. And it makes me kind of wonder, you know, how bad will the symptoms have to be before your performance is affected, right? Like, you know that if your digestion's not right and you're not, you could be eating the very best food, but if you're not digesting and assimilating it properly, then how's that going to affect your performance? And I think the answer is it's pretty profound.
Yeah, I was actually listening to a Bulletproof Executive Radio podcast yesterday with JJ Virgin, and she was mentioning how she was training, I think it was Suzanne Summers' daughter, and I could totally relate to this when she was saying how her Suzanne Summers' daughter would start off the day, feeling okay, but by the end of the day, after eating foods, like the bloating with the bacterial overgrowth, her stomach would just explode to the point where then she wasn't even comfortable eating like normal amounts of food. So it was like almost like this double-edged sword of like you eat and you're screwed, and then you don't eat, which screws you at some level too. Like I could actually kind of relate to that.
Yeah, definitely. So, the first thing I should say actually about this whole process is it doesn't replace what you're currently doing with your doctor. So if you're drawing blood each year and you're having your vitamin D checked and you're doing a complete blood cell count and all that type of work, then I would encourage you to keep doing that, because it's really useful information, and in general, the more information you have, the better off you're going to be. But the thing that I've realized about that blood work, and I realized this quite quickly when I was trying to fix my own problems, is none of that information is particularly actionable. So you get back a diagnosis of anemia, which is one of the things that I had, or like low thyroid function. I mean, what are you going to do about that? It's like, it's not very actionable. I mean, sure, you can take a prescription, maybe they'll prescribe you some synthetic thyroid or something like that, and that might help with the symptoms of low thyroid, but it's not really going to do anything to address the underlying root causes. And these types of tests that I've been running with Jamie, that's what they're looking at. They're looking at, what's going on with this person's digestion, what's going on with their adrenals, are they able to detox properly, and that's what makes them different.
So that's a huge point to make. A lot of Western medicine practices are treating symptoms, or not treating problems, and this is where functional medicine really steps in. And granted, it's not necessarily the cheaper route this day and age, which is unfortunate. In fact, I just got my health enrollment stuff in the mail right before we got on the phone here. But if you're willing to take a leap of faith, and I don't even think it's like that far of a stretch, but if you're willing to, really get to the root causes of some of the things that are plaguing you, you got to go this route. There's just really honestly no alternative. I've honestly been going to primary care physicians and with whatever thing, like it's here, take this prescription, or just stop exercising so much or something. And it's just like these solutions that are just kind of like that really honestly, that's not the problem. Like that doesn't make sense. And so Chris, how are you guys with like Jamie and everything? What are you doing that's allowing you guys to treat the symptoms and not just, or treat the problem and not just the symptoms, like we're seeing in traditional Western medicine practices?
Yeah, so Jamie's in a difficult place at the moment where she's not long out of residency. She's quite a young doctor, and she's realizing that her work in a normal primary care practice is not particularly helpful for a lot of people. So, someone that weighs 300 pounds will walk into her office and, what are we going to do for them? You've got 20 minutes and then you have to write a prescription. Like, what can you really do for that person? And so this process that we've come across is kind of the solution, right? You need to look at functional lab work that shows you what's going on. So let me show you. I've got a slide here. I can show you my screen. So I've learned from Dr. Dan Kalish that there are 3 body systems that are extremely important when it comes to overall health. And these 3 seemingly fairly simple things can cause a whole myriad of symptoms. So there's not that many root causes, but there's tons and tons of symptoms. So this makes sense when you look at it, okay, so I've got a problem with my skin, or I've got tinnitus, or I can't sleep at night, or my libido's gone, or my digestion sucks, or anything. Well, it turns out that there's not actually that many underlying root causes. So the first thing we do is look at adrenal function, and the reason we do it is because nearly everybody has got too much stress in their life. So when you look at what is the stress response for, it's designed to save the day. So imagine this analogy: you're running across the African savannah and a lion jumps out from behind a bush. There's this hormone cortisol that your body is going to produce, and it's going to allow you to save the day, right? So it's going to increase your blood pressure, increase your blood glucose, get your breathing going, get your heart rate up, and hopefully you'll survive the day, and then it won't happen again for 6 months. And when you look at that response, it looks an awful lot like what happens when you go out and train. So it doesn't matter whether you're doing a super hard kettlebell workout or whether you're doing a long endurance ride on your bike, you're going to see this same sort of stress response being produced. And that's great. You know, that's part of what you're trying to achieve with training, is doing a little bit of breaking down so that you grow back stronger. But the problem is, if you do this too much, there's too much breaking down, and then you start to fall to pieces. So, you know, when you look at the problems that are being identified by these types of tests, they're all diseases of chronic stress, so too much breaking down. So when you look at things like digestion and immunity and forming new memories and creating new muscle tissue, all of those things are long-term building projects, right? If you're being chased by a lion, today is not the day to be making babies, especially if you're a woman, right? So that makes sense. So, you know, all those things get put on hold, but if you're going out, if you're, you know, a top-level age grouper at triathlon, then you're probably going out and training every single day. So there's a whole bunch of things that are constantly being put on hold. And so I found that these 3 types of tests are really good at uncovering the types of problems that are caused by this stress physiology. And it all starts with this blue circle in the top left-hand corner there where it says adrenals, brain, right? So this is the first thing to go wrong. You're using the stress response too much, and you start to see problems with the hormones. So that's primarily cortisol, DHEA, which is an anabolic hormone that builds up muscle tissue. This is what you want to happen after you work out.
Yeah, it's your precursor to testosterone and sex hormones and stuff.
Exactly, yeah. So testosterone, estrogen, they're all derived from this precursor called DHEA. And then, you know, once the hormones get dysregulated, unfortunately, one of the things that cortisol does is it signals the end of inflammation. So if you can imagine, it's involved in your immune system activity, and you know what this is like. You go out and you do that race, and the next day you get sick. And for some people, they might even be able to get this response even with a hard workout. They get sick the next day. And this is why it's the training, the stress response that's putting immunity on hold, and then it makes it possible for you to pick up an infection.
That open window period, if you will.
Exactly, yeah. So, you know, you've seen the effect with it, like a cold, or maybe you get the flu or something like that. But what you can't see is what's going on inside your gut. So we've got to this window where immunity has been lowered, and that makes it possible for you to pick up an infection in your gut. So obviously the main port of entry into your body is the food that you put in your mouth, and none of it is squeaky clean, and there's no way that you can ever make your environment so it's totally devoid of all of these bugs that might possibly make you ill. But in this state where you're overtrained and you've got low cortisol, it's really easy for you to pick up one of these bugs, and then it can become a sort of chronic, smoldering infection. So the types of bugs and infections that I'm finding on these tests, they're not the sort of thing that, you know, it's not Ebola, it's not going to kill you, but at the same time, it can really wear you out, make you really tired, and affect your performance.
So, Chris, is this the stool test or the organic acids test? Like, what test are you talking about right now?
Yeah, so the way that these tests, I'm going to talk about 3 different types of tests tonight, and the first is a saliva test, and that fits in with the adrenals, right? So we're looking at adrenal complex hormones. That's the blue circle. And then the stool testing, that fits in with that sort of pinky beige circle on the right-hand side, GI. And then what happens is, if you've got an infection and you've been walking around with it for long enough, which is the case for me, certainly, and I think probably pretty much everybody that I test has been walking around. This is not something new, you know, this is not something, I noticed that my performance started going downhill last week. It's some, you know, I noticed 5 years ago, that you see that the detox pathway, so the liver becomes overburdened dealing with the mess that's created by the infection. So your immune system creates these things called antibodies, and they hook up with bits of whatever from the infection, which is called an antigen, and it creates this
Uh-oh. I am not hearing Chris.
It's because your liver cannot keep up with the burden that's being placed on it. So there's this kind of sequence that starts with stress, infection, and then the liver gets overburdened.
Got it. You kind of cut out there. I don't know if you cut out for other people too.
Oh, really? Okay.
I lost like about 30 seconds, 20 seconds.
Oh, really?
Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oops.
Whoops. I don't know. It's not like Skype where I can or can I text or type something to you on this?
Yeah, there is a chat window on the right-hand side there.
Oh yeah. Okay. Anyways, I think it's all right. So the liver is the one that takes the biggest hit. Then is basically what you're saying. And if you're having these issues going, whether from the gut or adrenals, and the liver is trying to detox all this chaos going on, and it's just getting more worn and more down, and then add to that just like other things that even outside of these infections that you may be doing in your life, food, drink, environment, all that kind of stuff as well, that could be either further taxing the liver.
Yeah, exactly. So most people, they know about some of those other things, and that's really important. So the food part that everybody's going to be dead familiar with from listening to your podcast, and other people out there that are absolutely brilliant, people like Mark Sisson, that the food that you eat can cause problems in your gut, and again, these problems are going to be like more work for your liver to do. And there's other things as well, like I'm probably a little bit allergic to cats, and there's not really much I can do about that. There's something genetic, but it's not like any one of these things. It's not like the food or the cats or the hay fever or any one of those things that really is the only problem. It's like the sum of everything. It's like the straw that broke the camel's back. It's like kind of you have to look out for everything, and most people only know about just one or two things.
So, Chris, let me step in, and when you're kind of to our listeners out there, like sort of evaluating themselves right now as we're starting to dive into this more, and you were talking about symptoms like fatigue or not feeling like yourself or da 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 da. How can you distinguish what's normal fatigue? Because quite frankly, if you're going to train, you're going to get tired, at least if you're doing it the right way. How does it then become something where you're like, something is just off, something is not right? Like, when is that like threshold?
I think, you shouldn't be feeling fatigue for, more than a few hours. So if you're doing a hard workout and you're still feeling it 4 days later, then something is going on. And, I think sex drive actually, especially for men, is like a real telltale first sign. If, you're not interested in women anymore,
so looking outside the box, then, like at these other things where you're like, oh shoot, I haven't had sex in 6 months.
Right. Yeah. If you don't understand why people have sex in cars, then I'm talking about you, right? Like it's kind of, it's gross and it's stupid, but people do it for a reason because it's they want it so badly. And if you don't want it like that, then of course everyone's different to a certain extent, but that's a kind of a sign for me that like maybe your libido is not what it should. And this goes fast. It makes sense when you think about it. The stress physiology. Your body is thinking, okay, we're being chased by a tiger, let's not worry about sex hormones right now. And of course for women, the way that they see that is with PMS symptoms. So what I'm discovering through these tests is that PMS is caused by a sudden drop in progesterone. So progesterone is a hormone it's involved in the female cycle. It's the progestation hormone, and it follows a monthly cycle. Estrogen peaks on, say, day 14. Progesterone peaks just slightly after it, and it's the sudden drop in progesterone that causes PMS symptoms. And I think for most athletes, this is a direct result of too much stress, probably too much training. So that's kind of an interesting sign.
Well, then, of course, you can, for females, I think there's even more concrete ways to measure. We have the female athlete triad, and you don't necessarily have to have an eating disorder to fall into this category, in my belief, but, you start to suffer from the effects of things like amenorrhea and a whole slew of hormonal issues. And, females are a complicated beast already, so a little bit more so than guys, arguably. So it could actually be, in my opinion, a tad bit easier to measure when things are starting to go south with your health and performance and your mental state for women, for sure. Ooh, this is a cool chart.
Yeah, so I thought I'd show you some results here to sort of dive in with it. You're right. The symptoms for women, they can be quite devastating and are quite complicated, but I would argue that rather than guessing, rather than waiting till this gets to the point where you're starting to show symptoms, it's much better just to do the test. You know, when you think about it, how bad does this problem have to be before I'm going to start showing a loss of libido or before I start getting PMS? And there's just no need for you to go through that process. You can do a simple saliva test at home and find out exactly what's going on right away.
And, you know, speaking to just the theme of today as well, too, like, you know, off-season testing and all that, I would like to throw in there, even if you don't suspect anything's wrong with you, establish that baseline if you haven't been tested yet. Because you know what? In 4 years, something could be going wrong. And then if you have data to look back on when you were actually doing well, that's huge. I've been blood testing now for years. The saliva stuff and all that's more new in my repertoire, but having my blood for years now is such a cool tool to have to be able to like compare and watch trends and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I wish I'd been collecting this data before I started training. It would have been really interesting to watch it. And I see it, you know, sometimes someone comes to me and they have some old data and I'm like, wow, look at that. And they don't even understand the significance of it. But when I see it, so, you know, here's a good example. This is a normal adrenal stress profile. So this is a saliva test. And all you do is you spit into a vial 4 times throughout the course of a single day.
The big size of your pinky about, and you spit right into it.
Yeah. So what this is doing, it's looking at levels of hormones in your saliva. And this is the free and unbound fraction of the hormone that's actually available to the cell. So this is a really useful test. The other thing about the main hormone that it's testing, cortisol, is it follows a circadian rhythm. So cortisol should be naturally highest first thing in the morning and then lowest last thing at night. And you can think of cortisol like units of energy. That's the easiest way to think of it. I've described it as the primary hormone of the stress response. So when that tiger jumps out from behind the bush, it's cortisol is one of the hormones that's going to get going. But it's also involved in energy balance. So low cortisol is low energy. And of course, low energy is what you want last thing at night when you're going to bed. You don't want high cortisol at night when you're trying to get to sleep. So I thought I'd start with this guy, and this is a really unusual finding, and this is a normal adrenal stress profile. I don't see that many of these. By the time people come to me, they've normally got some complaint, they're showing symptoms, and you know the chart is a mess. But this guy, you can see he's waking up with about 20 points of cortisol in the morning, and then you know he has about 1 at night. So really his main interest was just, how am I doing? You know, I'm kind of interested in this biohacking thing. Tell me how I'm doing. The only thing I could slightly find wrong here is his afternoon cortisol is a bit on the low side. You can see that 3.7 with the asterisk next there in bold. That's a little bit low. So he probably feels a bit tired in the afternoon, which is a really, really common symptom. Most people, you know, they eat lunch and they feel a bit tired afterwards, and they think it's something else, and it's not. It's related to circadian rhythm.
Yeah, see, in my test, I had even a bigger slope. So my cortisol was pretty normal in the morning, but that afternoon, like that slope from morning to afternoon was even more aggressive. So I was showing definite signs of just that, like that tanking, like in the afternoon, which, you know, I would get that 3 o'clock slump. And again, since, you know, we've been working together and doing some stuff, I'm not getting that anymore. I mean, occasionally maybe, but definitely not to the level I was before.
Right, exactly. And then there's another hormone on this one. It's called DHEA. I mentioned it before. This is an anabolic hormone. So when you go out and you do a heavy session, you know, whether it's on the bike or running or swimming or, you know, lifting heavy things, this anabolic hormone DHEA is actually, not only is it a precursor, it's active in its own right. So this is switching on the muscle synthesis, the protein synthesis, and actually building you back stronger. And so what I normally see in people that have chronic fatigue and excessive stress is this number DHEA, it starts to fall, and it should be an 8, 9, or a 10. And you can see this guy here is an 8.47, which is great. And then eventually it trickles down. And if you were like me, it like can get as low as 1. And then at that point, you see the symptoms as you're just not seeing the benefits from training anymore. Like I just stopped doing strength training because I couldn't see the point. I just didn't get any results from that. So, yeah.
I have a couple questions on this. The DHEAs, since this is related to things like testosterone and stuff, is it different for men and women what the normal ranges and reference ranges are?
It's not actually. So on page 2 of this test, there are lots of metabolites of DHEA, But for men and women, as far as I understand, the optimal range is the same. It's an 8, 9, or a 10.
And then also, I understand, and it's pretty clear why you'd want to see the cortisol because you want to see that progression throughout the day for sure. But a lot of people test these things on blood tests, and cortisol fine. But with the DHEA, why would the saliva DHEA be more accurate or better than through blood tests alone?
So the difference between hormones measured in blood and hormones measured in saliva is primarily the fact that they're unbound in saliva. So there's a transport, a binding globulin that steroid hormones are bound to be transported in the blood. So you can have normal levels of hormone in the blood and still show the symptoms of the low side of that equation. So you could still exhibit the symptoms of low testosterone even though it measures normal in the blood because it's bound, there's a high level of this binding globulin. So I think that the saliva is better for that reason. But then of course cortisol follows a circadian rhythm. You can see it here on this chart. Well, I can't send you to the lab 4 times during one day to get blood drawn. And then the other problem is a lot of people, including me, find getting blood drawn kind of stressful, and it's the stress hormones that we're measuring here, right?
So I hate it. I've learned to accept it, but it's like I was talking to someone yesterday. I'm like, there's 2 things I hate in this world. It's getting blood taken, and it's when I get sick and I've thrown up in my life because throwing up is the worst.
yeah. I mean, I didn't even know. I've kind of gotten better at it now, but I used to not realize that I was holding my breath, and so I would pass out in the chair because I've been holding my breath.
Oh no!
So yeah, the stress response is an amazing and dangerous thing. It really is, and you really need to understand it if you're gonna be using it on a daily basis.
I was just going to ask for your more results because I know saliva does more than just those 2.
Yeah, so there's page 2 on this saliva test, and this looks at, there's kind of a lot of stuff going on this page, but this is looking at all the metabolites of DHEA. So the thing to understand about cortisol is all of the steroid hormones are derived from the same precursor. So there's this one mother hormone called pregnenolone, and then all the other steroid hormones are all derived from it. And so
can I say real quick, you know, if anyone even wants, after, I know you're going to do a great explanation right now, but we talked about this. I first learned about pregnenolone this year myself, which is crazy because, you know, it's such an important hormone. And I had Dr. Suzanne Bennett on my podcast, and we discussed the whole concept of the pregnenolone steal and all that kind of stuff. And it's really, really interesting. And I'm shocked that, you know, it hasn't given more exposure, you know, in the world of athletes and all that kind of stuff when dealing with these kinds of things.
Yeah, so I think one of the main reasons is nobody's going to get rich selling pregnenolone. It's a naturally occurring, it's an endogenous molecule, which means you can't hold a patent to it. You can't, it's not like I could make it and sell it and own a patent and, you know, make a ton of money. I think that could be part of it. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not an expert in that, but yeah, for sure, I know that all of the hormones are derived from it, and when you look back at that stress response, when you know that, you know, if you're being chased by a tiger, then you want to produce this hormone cortisol in order to survive the day, then it doesn't make sense to make any of the things that you can see listed on this page. So estrogen, that's for women making babies, and then testosterone at the bottom there, you know, that's making babies in men, and then it's also building muscle tissue, and it's outgoing, goal-seeking, and aggressiveness, all that kind of stuff. So none of those things make sense when you're trying to survive the day. And so typically what I see is these numbers on this page, estrogen and progesterone for women, go extremely low in the presence of too much stress. So this guy's doing great. His testosterone is actually kind of high.
You said he was an athlete?
He is an athlete, but the bad news is, I think for a lot of people listening to this, is when I show you a result like this and there's nothing wrong with it, it's because he's not an endurance athlete. He's not subscribing. Yeah, right. So he's more like, you know, I listened to Mark Sisson on your podcast the other day. It's fantastic, and he's the kind of guy that subscribes to that model. So it's the kind of the minimal effective dose when it comes to exercise. He's not doing any cardio whatsoever, and he's just doing like really high intensity kettlebell workouts maybe once every week or 10 days or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it goes to that argument, like, can you have both health and performance at the optimal level as an endurance athlete? And I think the jury's still out on it, but I think in more cases than not, the answer is no. You got to sacrifice something to get somewhere.
Yeah, it's true, and you have to assess your goals. If you're at the top of your game, like say Jamie, that's trying to win races at the highest level, she perhaps is willing to sacrifice something of her health in order to achieve that level of performance. But certainly for me and most people that I work with, they're not taking a paycheck for this.
Yeah.
Your performance outside of the event is far more important to you than the actual result. And certainly in mountain bike races, the result is forgotten in minutes. I don't know what it's like at Ironman or something. I guess it's a bit different, but no one really gives a toss about the results. It's like, what did you do again? Like nobody cares about that stuff.
Yeah, I can't remember half my results. I already had forgotten Kona results.
Exactly, but you certainly remember when someone looks like crap and they're really tired, and your wife will definitely remember when you haven't shown an interest in sex for 6 months.
Yeah, exactly. It's a good point. And I think personally, like when I do get back to some racing and stuff, like I'm going to be a different person. Chris, and we've talked about this in detail, like by nature, I'm a very competitive person, and that will not just get up and disappear, but yeah. I'm not going to, continue to just drill my body into the ground and put myself back in that hole where I've been before. Like, it's just absolutely not worth it to me anymore.
Yeah, for sure, and I'm in the same place. I'm driven. I'm competitive. If I'm going to do something, if I'm going to enter a race, I want to do the best I possibly can. But there's a sliding scale there. I'm not willing to go back and drive myself into the floor and, with the training, like spend the rest of the day on the couch just because, for an event. That doesn't make sense. And I
can't afford to do that anymore. I mean, maybe was able to get away with it when I was in college and stuff still, and I was like, yeah, I'm a college student, whatever. But now, I got stuff to do.
Yeah, and I think another important thing to understand here is, and I'm sure people have noticed this with athletes around them, is as you get older, you tend to accumulate more responsibility. So what I know from doing these tests is there are a number of ways in which you can dysregulate cortisol. So your body doesn't know the difference in between having an argument with your wife and being stuck in a traffic jam and doing a long run, right? It's all cortisol, it's all stress. And so as people get older, as athletes get older, they tend to accumulate more responsibilities and more crap in their life, and it reduces their capacity to train. But what happens is they get slower or they don't get the results, and typically they up the training volume or intensity or both, and then they just make the problem worse. And so, it's a pretty, you'll see this, like, the 17-year-old athlete that can eat crap, they're eating burritos, drinking Coke, they're doing 25 hours a week of training and they're still winning races, and you're like, what the heck? Like, how? And it's because they've not got any kids to worry about.
Yeah.
And they're not like worried about whether the next paycheck is going to make their rent or something like that. It's just totally different.
Also, we mentioned the pregnenolone and everything. How come that's not usually or ever, I don't know, tested?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know is the answer. It's just, I could show you the steroid. These are the active forms of the hormone, right? So pregnenolone is not active in its own right. It doesn't do anything. It's just a precursor. You could go beyond that. All of these steroid hormones are actually derived from cholesterol. It's cholesterol and then pregnenolone, and then these are the derivatives of pregnenolone. So, it's like you have to like pick a point in that tree somewhere to start measuring. I guess that's why the lab do it this way.
Got it. So one of the favorite tests, and this one seems more related to adrenals and hormonal issues and all that, which is absolutely associated with the gut. But the one test that you had me do that I had not done until I hooked up with you guys was that organics comprehensive profile. And oh my gosh, I've told plenty of my clients about this. In fact, I see one of my clients on here now. Hi, Kim. It was, so much of it was so over my head, and especially coming even from someone who's studied this kind of stuff for a while now, so much of it was so over my head, but you did a great job explaining my results to me and everything. And then that to me was the test that you were able to hone in, like some cleansing sort of supplements, whatever we did, that really made the world of a difference.
Yeah,
Do you
it's a
have one of
cool
those that you
test.
can share?
I do, yeah. Let me show you one of those. I'll show you what it looks like. This is what I normally see. Before I get to that, this is what
Oh,
the
that's
normal types of
insane.
problems I see on these saliva tests.
Yeah,
So
that's bad.
this is a cool story. I'll tell you this story real quick.
Okay.
People hear about cortisol as being the enemy, and that high cortisol, is death basically. And to some point, that's right. Like it's a catabolic hormone. It breaks things down. And for this particular woman, she didn't realize it until she did this test, but she actually had a post-traumatic stress disorder
Oh,
that
wow.
was triggered by the alarm clock. So each morning, the alarm would go off, she'd have this episode of post-traumatic stress, and it would get the stress hormones going that kind of affected her for the rest of the day. You can see it in the morning, alarm clock goes off, we're looking for 24 points of cortisol, we've actually got 101. So this
Oh,
is crazy. So yeah, I mean, she didn't know about this until she did the test. And here's another one. This again is really common. So you see, in the morning we're looking for 24 points of cortisol. We're only getting 5.9, and then the rest of the day, you see on the chart here, they're the brown line. By noon, it's zero point 0.4 points of cortisol. So this is a person. I can put this guy in a darkened room at midday, and he's going to be out asleep in 10 minutes. Like this is a problem. And this one's even lower, like 5.5 points of cortisol for the entire day. Look at her circadian rhythm. It's just completely flat throughout the whole day. This woman is desperately tired. And then sometimes I see this. You see this brown
whoa.
chart, the line here. So this is someone with a broken circadian rhythm where they're waking up with less cortisol than they had at noon. And the reason they've got more cortisol at noon is because they worked out. They did a CrossFit session. And you can see, oh, actually, that's right. And then something is going on. So this, to me, like this first adrenal test is interesting as well, because it's kind of it makes me know that there's something going on and that you should do some additional tests. Like there's a reason why this woman's nighttime cortisol is still at nearly 10 points. She either has an infection or there's something. So I asked this question: why is this happening? And this is what makes this style, this approach different from what your doctor is doing, because I'm constantly asking why. It's what I do. I'm a computer scientist. I'm a hacker. I'm constantly saying, why is this? Why is this person's cortisol? It's like debugging a computer program to me. And so that's where the organics profile comes in.
I love that. I love that you're carrying over the computer science.
Yeah, it's the same.
No, it's like total biohacker, but like you
Yeah.
have like the ultimate background of being an actual hacker.
Yeah. So I'll show you. So here's the other bad news, right? So this organic acids test, it's super cool. It's a urine test. So again, there's no need for a trip to a doctor's office, no blood draw. You just collect some urine first thing in the morning, send it into the lab. This PDF report comes back to me. And what this test does is looking at the metabolites of amino acids. So amino acids are things that come from the protein that you eat. And the best way to think of it is like, this is the exhaust gases. So do you know when you take your car into the garage and they put the car on the rolling road, they put a probe up the exhaust and they measure the gases, and at the end they say, okay, I can see that your engine's not running very well because of this is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong. That's the way that this test is working as well. It's not actually measuring anything directly, it's measuring everything indirectly. It's a surrogate marker. So what it looks at, these main areas are fatty acid metabolism, and this is really important for endurance athletes. So everybody by now is totally subscribed to the idea of being a fat-adapted athlete, right? You only have so much glycogen and lots of fat. So if you're exercising for 3 hours, then you certainly want to be mostly burning fat. And this test can actually tell you how well you're utilizing fat as fuel, and if any micronutrients exist that could be stopping that from happening. And then it also looks at carbohydrate metabolism, how well the Krebs cycle is working, whether there's any B vitamin deficiencies, methylation, neurotransmitter. It's like a really comprehensive test. And the thing that's novel about this one is there's nothing wrong with it. So again, this is a really unique finding. I don't see this very often. You can see in each of these different sections it says no abnormality found.
I know on mine, I think the only section that was the case was in the fatty acid metabolism.
Yeah.
category. I had no abnormalities there, which was pleasant, but definitely not the case in other places.
Yeah, and so, guess what? This is a guy that's not doing any endurance exercise. He's another guy that's fully subscribed to the Marcus Sisson approach to health, where he's just doing, lots of walking, occasional lifting heavy things, and then maybe now and again he'll sprint, and it doesn't really matter how you sprint. So I've actually got your result here, which is a little bit more interesting than that one.
Oh, now we're getting real, people. See, look, no fatty acid metabolism, no abnormality.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, something I don't always see. So yeah, each person is unique. That's the thing that's interesting about this test is I really don't know what the result is going to be. Everybody is different. And so one of the organic acids, so the way this test works, if you look in the left-hand column, you see this name of this organic acid, and in this case, it's a very famous one. It's called beta-hydroxybutyrate. And this is the primary ketone body. And the reason it's on this test is because it was designed to detect people that are severely insulin resistant. So you see that in the final stages of diabetes, that blood glucose goes high, and this ketone body, beta-hydroxybutyrate, also go high. And that's impending doom. It really is. So they put that on this test, but normally when I see it, it's not because the person is severely diabetic, it's because they're eating a low-carb or ketogenic diet. And I'm pretty sure that was the case for you here, right?
Here's what's really interesting. I had absolutely zero intentions of ever putting myself in ketosis, especially after kind of, following some athletes who've done it before. It did not seem like the smart idea, but here's an example of just myself making an honest mistake, is that apparently I was eating too low carb at the time, and inevitably had myself in somewhat of a state of ketosis. I mean, is that what's presented here?
Yeah, so I think it's normal for people to be mildly ketotic or be cycling in and out of ketosis if they're doing it right. So I'm sure you're aware that there's a right and a wrong time to eat carbohydrates. Like most people that I know don't need carbohydrates for breakfast. So if you've been through an overnight fast and you don't eat any carbohydrates for breakfast, then it might be reasonable to assume that by the time you collect this urine sample in the morning that you're starting to show some ketone bodies.
Interesting. I'd be curious to know then what I'd eaten that week. I'd have to look over my stuff, but I might be able to make some assumptions. I'm pretty good at having a memory like that. But I'm not going to lie, like, ever since knowing that too, like, I'm like, heck no, I don't want to be in ketosis. So I've, like, definitely made sure I'm not and going that low carb ever. I mean, I still consider myself fairly fat adapted, and I'm not going on to the other end of the spectrum by any means. Just being a lot more careful and monitoring this stuff, actually, like, tracking a little bit better.
Right, yeah. So some more significant findings for you were the energy production section. So do you see that there's these fancy words, cis-acetate, fumarate, malate, hydroxymethylglutarate. These are the names of Krebs cycle intermediaries. So you might remember from high school biology, they tortured you with trying to memorize all the different steps in the Krebs cycle, or the citric acid cycle as it's referred to on this test, I believe. And this is the way in which you turn the food that you eat and the air that you breathe into energy. This is how you produce ATP. And what's going on here is the lab, they're measuring these organic acids that might be building up as the result of a blockage. So you can almost think of this like water flowing. And if there's some kind of blockage in the flow, then you start to see these organic acids building up. And it tells you you're not producing energy as well as you should. So in the middle column, it tells you why the Krebs cycle is not working as well as it should. So in your case, the main finding was you had a deficiency of this enzyme CoQ10, which is almost impossible to get from food. It comes somewhat from organ meat, and it can be produced endogenously, so inside your body too. But it's crucial for producing energy. So I would expect you to not be able to run as fast because of this.
So, and here was the interesting thing too. I was like, wait, Chris, I'm supplementing with CoQ10. I'm taking up to 200 milligrams a day or something like that. I think that's what it was. And it just turns out that the brand and particular one that I bought was not working in my body. Is that the case?
Yeah, I think so. So sometimes it's, the problem is that the person is just not taking enough. You could be supplementing with something, but it's just not. But with CoQ10, it's notoriously hard to absorb.
Yeah.
And they sell it in Costco for $7 or whatever. It's a waste of your $7. It
And
really.
see, I wasn't even going that bad. In fact, I think one of the ones I was taking was one that I heard about on a podcast. But I switched to the one that you guys sell on your website. I don't know actually what brand that even is. I'd be curious to do a retest at some point.
Yeah, so I think there's a number of companies that make ubiquinol that seems to be better absorbed. I think they're all pretty badly absorbed, but I've seen from my own test results, I had this problem, not as bad as yours, but similar on my organics profile, and I just retested this week, and the problem was certainly gone.
Are you taking that same brand that you saw on your website?
Yeah, exactly. It's Allergy Research Group, I believe.
So what made you choose that particular brand? What sets it apart from some of the others, especially with the rate of absorption being low in general?
Yeah, so I know that the ubiquinol, I can't say that word ever. Yeah, I know that's the most bioavailable form. To be honest, I was turned on to it by another doctor. So, that's where it's kind of cool. That's what Jamie spends a good deal of her time doing, is doing the research on various different supplements. And so she'll say to me, you need to be looking at this particular product. I think it's going to be the best way to see the problems that we're seeing on the lab work. And then I'll look at it, and then we start to incorporate it into our protocol. So yeah, we're constantly doing the homework on the supplements to make sure that we've almost got the best stuff, or at least stuff that's solving our problems.
Yeah, no, I mean, for example, again, like you had me take an oil of oregano supplement, and you changed it, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, why'd you change it? And you gave me a really awesome answer. And
Yeah.
you're like doing your homework and keeping up with this stuff. Like you wanted to make sure that it was as pure as possible and the best quality as possible, and implement that kind of stuff. It's great. It's great quality control, because that's the kind of stuff that I try to look at too. But you can't do it all perfect all the time, right?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. It's like I do this for a living now, and I just couldn't do this before. When I had a full-time job, I just didn't have time to sit there and like troll through all the product pages on iHerb or Amazon or something. It's just. But yeah, I should get to there's some other really significant. I'm going to skip over this B complex. I mean, obviously the B vitamins. The B vitamins come up for everything, like every single process within your body. Whether it's producing new red blood cells or hair or neurotransmitters or tissue, anything, they all require B vitamins. So it's difficult to overstate the importance of B vitamins. But I think this methylation thing, like it really blows my mind. The more I learn about methylation, the less I understand, I swear. So this comes down to genetics, and I'm sure lots of people listening will have heard of the MTHFR mutation. This is a genetic problem that affects your ability to turn folate that turns up in your food. So if you eat leafy greens, there's folate in that. Or if you take a folic acid supplement, then it's supposed to turn into 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate, which is then used partly as in your detox cycle, so to help your liver work better, but more importantly, it's used to control the expression of the genome. So this is actually changing the way that your genetics works, and an insufficiency of the tetrahydrofolate will alter the way that your DNA, how your genetics are actually working. So this here is like, it's this one stupid organic acid is a total game changer. Like just this one finding for you could be huge.
So wait, what was the answer to that one?
It's
I don't remember.
That's the thing that's so dumb. It's like you can just take 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate in a supplement. So Thorne makes a product called Basic B Complex.
Oh, I'm taking that now.
Yeah, so that's what you're taking. That's the most bioavailable form of tetrahydrofolate. And that's going to solve your B vitamin problems and the folate in one supplement.
Okay.
But the cool thing is, you knew which supplement to take, right? There's a lot of supplements out there.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Okay, so I'm not going to lie. There's the people who are listening right now, you've got to agree with me. That was a mouthful that you just said, Chris, and I could not repeat what you just said. I was like, woo, kind of above my head. But if you have then therefore the answer and you can do that homework, like, okay, maybe, I don't need to know what it is in layman's terms, fine. Just tell me what I need to take to fix it. Is it good? Sold.
Yeah, everyone's different. Some people like to geek out on this stuff and really know the details. And, some people, they'll go away and they'll do a ton of homework and they'll listen to 15 podcasts and they'll come back and say, have you looked at this and this? I'm like, no, I haven't actually, but I will now that you've told me. It's like, and then other people are like, just tell me what to do.
Yeah, see, like that's kind of, I'm in an interesting situation there because I want to be able to understand like the premise of a test like this so I can recommend it to my clients, for example, but I don't necessarily feel like I need to become an expert at every little detail.
Mhm.
Like I got a lot of stuff that I'm trying to be an expert at right now. I'll leave
Right.
the tetrahydrofolate stuff
Yeah.
to you.
Yeah. No.
Okay. That's interesting though. I mean, how much of like one little thing is like a game changer. Now, is that something that you see fairly commonly wrong in people?
No, no, I wouldn't say
Okay, good.
no.
That's good then for other
Yeah,
people.
no, it's yes, it's not unusual, but it's not common either, I'd say.
Okay, okay.
And then so these neurotransmitter markers are kind of interesting. What this is telling you, I don't want to get too technical here with you, but basically your body can decide what it does with a protein that you eat. And in particular, there's this protein tryptophan. And tryptophan, a lot of people know about it because it's supposed to make you sleepy, right? It comes from you're just about to eat your Thanksgiving dinner, right? It's going to make you
Right?
tired. People say, oh, it's the tryptophan in the turkey. And there is actually some truth in that. So the tryptophan, it should go down towards this pathway that leads to serotonin, which is an inhibitory neurotransmitter, and then melatonin, which is a sleep hormone. So it sort of makes sense that, this kind of turkey sleepy thing. But there's actually a fork in that road. So your body can choose to go down this other route that goes towards kyurinate and piclinate to fight an infection. So when someone's got some sort of infection going on, then you quite often see kyurinate and piclinate and quilinate as well as not actually on this one become high or low. So yeah, it's kind of what this is saying to me is there's probably an infection present.
What did we assume that that was with me? I don't remember.
So let's see. I'm going to scroll down a bit.
Was that the Candida?
Yeah, so what we found for you is, let's see, so you see this marker here,
Yeah.
hydroxyphenol acetate, intestinal bacterial overgrowth.
Oh, okay. Was that the Candida? No, that was the one where you said I was taking a probiotic that had something in it that was actually not good, right?
Yeah, let's see.
There was a certain probiotic that you had.
Yeah, so that's the delactate forming species. But so what this marker is telling you is you have an overgrowth of bacteria, and then specifically in your small intestine. So there's supposed to be
SIBO,
lots
right?
more. Sorry,
Isn't
SIBO,
that
exactly.
SIBO? Yeah.
Exactly. So bacteria, there should be lots more bacteria in your large intestine than your small intestine. And then in some circumstances, and I think it's quite complicated, the mechanisms that lead to this, you get the bacteria moving from the large intestine into the small intestine, where it can then affect your ability to digest and assimilate the food that you're eating. So that's where the bloating feeling is coming from. You eat carbohydrate especially, you feed this bacteria that's living in the small intestine, and then you feel bloated. Right? So your body sees that as an infection. It's saying, this is something that shouldn't be there. Let's activate the immune system and see if we can get rid of it. But the bacteria is pretty happy where it is, and it's being fed every few hours, and so it's not going to get up and walk away without a fight.
Mm-hmm.
And then, on top of that, the yeast overgrowth, the candida thing you saw, so there's this metabolite D-arabinitol, and that's a metabolite of candida especially. So this shows that you've got a yeast overgrowth.
Mm-hmm.
So
And that one, actually, believe it or not, I had a feeling that was the case because I had started doing a little bit of research and looking really deep into kind of some of the things I was feeling and the symptoms, and also kind of knowing in my head what I had been putting into my body over the course of the year. It was like, an Ironman training year and kind of intense in that sense. And I actually had a feeling that was going to be the case. I was actually pleased to see that my gut instinct, see what I did there, actually was sort of true in this case. And this is seriously one of the things, though, like once I took the steps to repair it, it was like, thank you, finally, oh my gosh, why didn't I do this sooner?
Yeah, so that's the most fun part of this job now. It's like I get all these people that think I walk on water because I've cured their bloating, it's like fantastic. But yeah, it's kind of important to point out here that a lot of people think that they've got a yeast overgrowth because they're doing something stupid. So we know that yeast likes to eat sugar and alcohol, and so if you're an alcoholic or a sugar addict, then you might end up with a yeast overgrowth, and that's true. But most people that I do this test with, that's not the case. They've already figured that part out, and they're not drinking too much alcohol, and they're not eating too much sugar, And the problem is that they've been under too much stress. So if I go back to that first picture again, this adrenals, so what's happened is the adrenal part has become overburdened, too much stress, too much training, and then immunity is lowered, and then you move over to the GI tract, and suddenly it becomes possible to have an infection there. So previously you had this really strong immune system that was making sure that the yeast couldn't take hold, and because of this lowering of immunity, everything changes, and then you pick up the yeast, and then you see the overburdening of the liver and other problems. So that's, it's complex, but it's predictable.
It's predictable, and like I said, you put it in really good terms that kind of lays it all out there. Because did you want to talk about more of the stuff on this test? Yeah,
so it's kind of complex. We've been through a lot. I wanted to show people real quick because there's another type of test that I've been doing.
Oh, is this the stool test?
This is the stool test, and this turned out to not be important for you. We didn't find anything on your stool test.
Although, didn't you see, though, that there was another sign of the yeast overgrowth that just kind of backed up what was found on the organics test?
Ooh. Yeah, so I think we saw, they look at, this is a traditional stool culture. Some of them look at a sample underneath the microscope, and they're trying to culture various different things. It's kind of weird. Like, people always say to me, what does this test look for? And I don't know, because it's a microbiologist, and they don't know what they're going to find. Like, they type it up. Like, there's obviously a certain set of things that they know could possibly be there, and I have a long list if I can give you if you want. But at the end of this experiment, the scientist actually types into this report, and one of the things they saw on your test at the top there, it says, I think it was Escherichia coli. It wasn't Enterobacter, but the amount of growth was weird. Like, it was only moderate when normally it should be abundant. So that's kind of a clue there. If E. coli is not the dominant species, if something else is displacing it, it tells you that something could be wrong. And so we found the answer to that question on the organics profile. We saw SIBO and we saw yeast, and I think that's why the E. coli being pushed out a little bit.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I just pulled up. I did say on the yeast section too, which you can see on lower part of the screen. Mine says light growth of Candida species isolated.
So that's backing up what we saw in the urine test then. That's quite unusual. This stool test, it's kind of inadequate for yeast. It's not very sensitive. The vials, unfortunately, this test involves collecting poo. And
it sucked.
It sucks. But the preservative they put in the vials, it doesn't do a very good job of preserving yeast. So you have to have a kind of a screaming yeast overgrowth in order for it to show up on this test.
Oh. There you go.
So yeah, so in this case they found, I talked about these smoldering low-grade infections that can stop you from performing as well as you should, and in this case they found this weird thing, Dientamoeba fragilis, which is some parasite. It's not going to kill you, but it definitely will cause damage and inflammation and maybe even bleeding inside your GI tracts and can stop you from performing as well as you should. And then here's another one. This is a really busy one. Blastocystis hominis is something I see a lot of. I've got this incredible story that I won't go into now. My aunt has suffered with this her whole life and had depression and anxiety, and only now is her life starting to turn around since she got rid of this bug, Blastocystis hominis. It also gets into joint capsules. If you've got joint pain, this is one to look for. And then you see this person had like an overgrowth of fungus as well. And then finally, the other one that I see lots and lots of is H. pylori. And this was true for Jamie.
Yeah, she talked about
so her only symptoms, she was on the podcast, she had no GI symptoms whatsoever. The only thing she'd noticed was that her cortisol was high, so it kind of looked out she was stressed for no reason, and she just not had a good season on the bike. And so we ran all the tests on her, obviously, and we found this bacteria, and it's quite famous for causing stomach ulcers, and then if you're not careful, those ulcers can become cancer. But one of the things it does is it lowers the acidity of the stomach, and so you can be eating really good quality protein, but you're not digesting and assimilating it properly, and so you can end up with all sorts of problems that then show up on the organics profile.
So interesting. So Chris, question to you again on this one. When people are thinking about like, well, is this really necessary for me? Like, in athletes, we do often hear, I hear more these days, people like, oh, like I swam in this crazy lake, I don't feel good, I probably have a parasite and stuff. But like, how much legitimacy is likely to that. Are we seeing that more people are contracting parasites? And like for Jamie, for example, like she's a doctor, she's obviously doing things as well as possible in her life, but even she fell victim to this, as she described on a podcast that I had her on Endurance Planet earlier this year.
Yeah, so I think it comes down to the stressing again, right? If you're being under a ton of stress, then I think it's much more likely that you're going to pick up one of these infections. And so it's definitely, it's worth checking. Sometimes there's some obvious things. You've got some GI symptoms going on. If you've got diarrhea, you have to do this test, right? It's a no-brainer. And the same with constipation as well, I think. Like chronic constipation, you should do this test. But sometimes, it's worth doing just because you've been under a ton of stress, especially swimmers. All of these bugs, I'm finding it's an oral fecal route that goes through water. And so if you're a swimmer that's under a ton of stress, then I kind of worry for you.
Yeah, there's lots of bodies of water that I will not swim in. Kim Neal knows Lake Mission Viejo is off the list for us these days. It's an inside joke. But, again, okay, like what I take from this, even just in this conversation, like the world of like what's going on inside your body, like it's not just about blood tests. Like blood tests are, relatively normal and easy these days to get done, and they can definitely give you an insight to things that we need to know. They're like the first step, but gosh, there's so much out there, or in there, I guess, with these other tests that are going to give you the full picture. And again, this goes back to like that original point that we were trying to make, is that, again, instead of just treating symptoms because your blood tests fall out of the normal range and your primary care physician puts you on a synthetic hormone, don't stop there, Go dig deeper into it. And then sometimes that's going to mean it's not, and also to that point, it doesn't mean you have to like fire your doctor. Like you don't have to be Dave Asprey, who did fire his doctor.
I fired my doctor as well, actually. I found my own doctor, right? That's what Jamie is. Jamie is the result of a 10-year search for a good doctor.
You're so lucky. I mean, you can still keep your doctor for like, girls, for example, our womanly appointments and stuff, fine. That, that's totally cool. But like for the other stuff that's going on in your life, especially if you're an athlete wanting to achieve optimal performance, I mean, this stuff to me, like when people are like, oh, I got like, $10,000 bike or something, I'm like, yeah, maybe sacrifice $1,000 of that bike and look into this kind of stuff, because if the engine's not working right, it doesn't matter, what your ride is that you're on,
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And I realized this quite early on that, I really like these carbon fiber bike wheels I have on my mountain bike, and they're made by this company called Envy, and they're fantastic. They're stiff and they perform. I love those wheels. And
those wheels were very popular at Kona this year, by the way.
Yeah, like they're just like, it used to be they were quite novel when I first got them a few years ago, and now everybody's got them. But my point is they cost $2,500, and I could do a really complete workup with you for that amount of money, and I will guarantee you that these lab tests and the solutions that I find to go with them are going to make you an awful lot faster than a set of carbon fiber wheels.
Not just faster, but happier too, because again, there is that idea of the gut-brain axis, and when gut health is going south, like we see is so common, we saw it with me, and again, guys, that's someone who's prescribing to very clean eating, 9 times out of 10, you guys know me through the podcast that that's the case and everything, and yet I was still kind of victim to some of these issues and had to repair. And, in the process, you find that, like, mentally you're just not as sharp, and sometimes you're not as happy as a person as you could be until you get it cleaned up.
Yeah, I just, my advice would be to not wait. Like, when you see, say, a B vitamin deficiency, don't wait until like it's anemia or something like that. That you're actually starting to show signs of brain fog, or something like that. You want to like get on top of it before it gets anywhere close to being that far.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, be proactive with this stuff. And I say the same thing in the gym, like with strength training. It's like, don't wait until it's an injury. Build the foundation, get strong first and foremost. So
we should answer some questions here. I know it's a lot of stuff.
Forgot about that.
I'm
not used to that because I'm doing the podcast, so it's like no people can try.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so I see here, this is a good one. NS, couldn't you find D-arabinitol in kombucha? So D-arabinitol, remember, is the organic acid that appears on the test and is a test for candida, so for yeast. And I don't know that it could come from kombucha. I doubt it. But I do know that it can come from other sources. So one source is some fruits, weirdly, actually produce this metabolite diarabinitol. So if you've been eating like buckets and buckets of cherries or something like that, it's possible that you can affect the test. So that's why I always look at the result at the same time as talking to the person. Like, you need to continue doing some detective work, and the person's story and the result, that makes the complete picture. I couldn't do this. If I just had this organics profile in front of me, I couldn't create a protocol for that person using the lab tests alone. Like, I need to hear the story. And so, yeah, that's kind of an important question.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. What else have we got? Have you got any questions, Tawny?
I don't know where they show up.
So in the chat box in the public, there's little tabs. On the far left tab, you see the top, there's a green button, and then underneath that it says check.
Oh, okay. Oops, yeah, there you go. Which blood test would you recommend for athletes? You know, I actually did a blog on this on my CoachTawny.com blog, and actually we pulled up right now, believe it or not. You know, you definitely want to get like some of the basic stuff, like your comprehensive metabolic panel done, which is gonna do, you know, everything from, you know, your electrolytes and protein and all that kind of stuff, and then of course your CBC, complete blood count, and then a lipid panel, which is your cholesterol and all that fun stuff. And then the hormones, though, are really, like, what I find when I'm working with my athletes and everything, and they're talking to their doctors and they're trying to get blood tests done, it seems like a lot of doctors just want to be like, oh, no, you don't need that. Oh, no, you don't need, no, and they just like start knocking all this stuff off the list, and I'm like, because they're looking, like, if you're exhibiting symptoms of, say, anemia, for example, then they'll test your iron. But to be proactive and test iron without exhibiting symptoms, it's like pulling teeth. Have you had that experience in the past, Chris?
Oh, yeah. I gave up.
It's ridiculous.
I think you have to understand something about the way that the whole system works. Like, I got to the point, I argued with my doctor so much, he actually showed me the flowchart. So there is a flowchart that they operate under. And you need to walk into your doctor's office and present with some symptoms. So, you know, he was willing to run thyroid panels on me because I had some symptoms of being hypothyroid. But without those symptoms, without that diagnosis, he's kind of powerless to order the lab, right? So yeah, they'll do like a year, they'll just do TSH or something. But if you want the complete panel that includes reverse T3 and antibodies and all that good stuff, then you need to be hypothyroid, and if you're not, they ain't doing it, and your insurance certainly isn't covering it.
Yeah.
So, you know, once you know this, you can game the system a little bit and say, oh, I'm feeling a bit cold or something, and then maybe they'll order the test. And I mean, they don't really care, right? Like, you know, it's all good to them, but
right.
It's like they can't take risks that, you know, that I just can't. So
that's where, like, a functional doctor, you know, Chris, do you guys actually do blood work through your test offered, or do we still have to go to a functional practitioner for that?
Yeah, no, we don't do it at the moment, and yeah. I'm wondering whether we should. And like I say, you can't really take much action. So when I found out I was hypothyroid and anemic, it wasn't like I could do anything. Like, it was a diagnosis, it was a verdict, but it wasn't like, well, what can you do about that? And it turns out that both of those things went away once I improved my digestive health.
Yeah,
The blood test sure as hell didn't tell me that that's what I needed to do. But at the same time, I still think it's a really good idea for people to get that blood work done, because it can tell you something is wrong long before it actually shows up as a symptom. And then also you can use it to track progress as well. So you know that my protocol's working because you can see it in the blood work.
Exactly. So yeah, again, getting back to the original question, Brielle, if you want to go to my website, CoachTawny.com, and do a quick search in the upper corner there for blood work, I have a full list, literally just like a list. And I've copied and pasted that and emailed it to clients and said, here, take this to your doctor, pretty much. And that's definitely geared toward athletes, but not even necessarily athletes, you know, maybe just, you know, especially for females, there's some women-specific stuff on there if you're really needing to, like, figure out some hormonal imbalances that you think are taking place. I'll list it out there for you. Someone, I missed some of these comments. Someone wanted me to look at the camera. Was I not looking at the camera?
No, that came in about, I could have said something. Yeah, that came in about like minute 2 or something.
Oh, was I cheating and looking on my phone or something? Whoops!
No, I don't think so. It's just, it's kind of weird. It's like, it's very difficult to get used to, actually, that, you know, I'm looking at like a hole in my monitor, right? Yeah. So Mindy had a good question here. What if which test should you start with if you've never done any of these tests before?
Yes.
And going back to that diagram I showed earlier that showed that like everything starts with the adrenals. It's the stress physiology that kicks everything off. So if you've never done any testing, any kind of functional lab work, then I'd highly recommend us doing the saliva test. It's super easy to do at home. It's not that expensive. It costs about $300, and that's a really good place to see where you're at. And if you're the sort of person that doesn't like to just wants to get something done, I want to be on the best of my form for next season, then you should just do all of the tests at once. Like, it takes much longer going back. Okay, I see you've got a problem on the saliva test. Let's do the urine test. Let's do this. That can really drag out. So, yeah, my advice is just to do all of the tests at once. I almost get the best results in the least amount of time when someone does that.
You're kind of anal about this too, because you're like, I'm not going to share your results until I have the results for all three, and with good reason, because they play into each other. These things are not independent, and especially like we were just talking about with like the yeast overgrowth that I experienced. It's like, okay, well, we saw it in the organics, but then it was even verified further through the stool test. And then the saliva test, of course. Oh, and I have my saliva test I actually did through another company, which is why I don't think you have my results. But, it's like those things are all correlated, and then I had sent you my blood test too. So, you have to get that full picture. And especially from my experience this year and knowing something was wrong with me but not really able to pinpoint it, I 100% am in belief that blood was not alone to figure it out. I am there's no other way to say that without these other tests, I would have not gotten to the solutions that I needed for myself. Blood was not enough. It was a huge part of it, but it was like only a small fraction of the bigger picture that I needed to get. That saliva, to me, actually, like this day and age, like I think almost like the saliva and the organics comprehensive profile are the most important, in my opinion. Especially like, like with stuff on blood tests, like chances are you're going to be fine when it comes to your CBC and all that kind of stuff. You still want to make sure to get it done every now and then. Again, like I said, you want to have that for like benchmarks throughout the year and whatnot, or over the years. But these other tests, there's something. I'm like such a fan. So.
Cool, yeah. So sometimes, I'll get someone come to me and their only complaint is something that they've seen on the blood work. So a classic example I can think of is someone that they come to me and they're like, oh, they've done one of these fancy cholesterol tests that measures LDL particle number, and they can see that they're in the highest risk group. So say their LDL particle number is above 2,000. Well, what are you going to do about that? I mean, he's already eating a low-carbohydrate diet, high-fat diet, and the problem is specifically the LDL particle count. And one of the things that LDL particles do is they have an antimicrobial effect. And so if you have one of these gut infections, you could expect to have a higher than normal LDL particle number. And that was the case for him. He had a C. difficile infection. It turned out that he'd spent a lot of time under a great amount of stress in old people's homes. So his mum had just died. He just lost her. So it was a great deal of like emotional stress. And he's in this environment where we know there's a lot of this rather nasty bacteria, C. diff. And the deadly combination of stress and exposure to the bacteria meant that he'd picked up this infection, and that was probably what was causing the elevated LDL particle number. And so all we had to do to fix the cholesterol problem was get rid of the gut infection.
See, and what's like kind of sucky about that is, and I gotta love my terminology there, but when we see that sometimes on tests, then we're led to believe that we're at higher risk for cardiovascular disease, which is then going to, potentially stress us out more and make us all worried about things. Yet that may not be the case here. It could be something else, an underlying issue going on. Yes, Chris, you there? Did it freeze? Can you guys hear me? I don't know.
Didn't quite catch that end part.
Oh, yeah, okay, I just heard you again. I don't know where we broke up, but I was saying with the LDL particle number, it's like, when you see a problem there, it says usually on tests or through the doctor you're at increased risk for cardiovascular disease or risk, and that in itself isn't then going to stress you out when in fact it may not even be the case. There could be another underlying problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's it's kind of weird. I don't know why this isn't just why it should be that me, a computer scientist, should be doing these tests, right? Like that's what years later I'm thinking, why did my doctor just not do this on me in the first place? It would have saved everybody a lot of trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Cool.
well, I think we should do another webinar. There's so much stuff here to cover that we didn't even get into the solution. Like I was thinking, we're going to talk about how to fix low cortisol and
like you can superstarch. I know we were going to talk about that.
Yeah, we're going to talk about all that stuff. And of course, none of it ever happened because defining the problem is just such a huge task in itself. And I think we should do another webinar and kind of get into that. Like people shouldn't lose hope that this is doom and gloom, and I'm never going to be able to fix any of these problems, because I can fix all of the problems that I find on this lab work, and it's really not that difficult. And you have the power to help yourself, and I can show you how. So yeah, I think we should do another one.
I'm down.
Yeah, that's done.
Yeah, absolutely. There's much more that I would like to share and talk about, because of course, everyone maybe, here's the other thing I've seen too, is, you may be able to be strict with yourself for a few months in clearing out some of these bad bacteria overgrowth or whatever it may be. You're really sucking it up and being healthy. But then to make some of these changes and implement them in your life for the long term, like stress reduction, much easier said than done. No one's going to deny that. And that's been something, again, you can't, personally in my life this year, I can't necessarily measure it with a test, but I know I've done so much work to chill myself out. And I noticed that the same things that used to trigger me and kind of set me off into this stress, bleh, it's not happening anymore. And that was, that was more just this up here of just being conscious to it and thinking about it versus taking a supplement. So not everything has to cost a ton of money in this whole situation either, which is a nice aspect of it.
Yeah, for sure. I realize now that the foundation of the solution is actually diet and lifestyle. So it's the stuff that everybody listening to this is already doing. Give yourself a pat on the back. You've already done the hard work. In the case of, say, yeast overgrowth, we talked about oregano oil is pretty good at getting rid of that. And swallowing an oregano oil capsule is actually a really easy task compared to giving up pizza, which probably everybody listening had to do at some stage. So yeah, that's definitely the most important and most difficult part.
Yeah. Well, Chris, thank you so much. I'm loving the webinar thing. I like the video. I like the chat stuff now that I figured out how to use it. Let's do it.
Yeah. I've actually popped in this little, there's an offer. If you want to come and talk to me, then there's a code. It's FHTA14. You should see in the bottom right-hand corner of the window there. You can click a button. And you can book an intake with me, and you'll get 50% off. So normally we charge $165 to do a new patient intake. And if you use that code, then you can talk to either me or Jamie, and it's actually, my wife is a food scientist, and she's been trained by the same people too, so you might talk to her. So that's pretty cool, but yeah, we'll do another one and talk more about the solutions.
All right, thanks for inviting me. This has been a blast.
Thank you for your time, Tony. This has been great.